obviously the worst time every Saturday was between 2:15 and 3 o'clock. They'd try everything to alleviate the tension, and I used to sit there and be a nervous wreck, and I'd observe things. And I used to listen to Graham Souness, would be the captain, or Kenny. If they would say anything, then they'd get a reaction from Roy Evans and Ronnie Moran or Joe Fagan. For example, as soon as shouted, let's start quickly, let's get to them early, Ronnie Moran would say, yep, he's right, that's it, he's right. Whereas if Whelan or Rush said anything, no reaction at all. So I used to wind Whelan and Rush up and say, look, I'm going to give you marks out of 10 here. This is before I'm going to give you marks out of 10 if you can get a reaction. And of course everybody used to join in. So Ronnie Whelan and Ian Rush would sit there and they'd try and think, they'd rack their brains to try and say something, would get a reaction. And of course if they did get a reaction, everybody would be going, not bad, not bad. And Joe Fagan caught us one day doing this. And what did Joe do? Joe joined in as well. Joe joined in. So Ronnie Whelan and Ian Rush would be sitting there and I used to say, don't come off the pitch disappointed. That's a win. That'll be a 9 out of 10. And then they'd say this, but they wouldn't say it with any great effect. Don't come off the pitch disappointed. And they wouldn't get a reaction. And then Souness would say it next week, don't come off the pitch disappointed. And Ronnie Moran would go, he's right, he's right. I never overcame the nerves. But the great thing about being nervous before the game is that once you get down the tunnel at 5-3, it's just like a release. The ones that I liked playing against were the ones that were slow, not big and strong, not good in the air, and couldn't play. The ones that Joe Jordan used to terrorise me early on in my career because he was big and strong, could run, and not bad in the deck. And I was one of these players that when I came into the team at Liverpool, instead of wanting to defend well, I always wanted to get the ball and play, and I would snatch at tackles instead of getting my foot in. I wasn't particularly great in the air. I mean, I was 6'2", so I was alright in the air. And I didn't like playing against them if they were big and strong and could run. Certainly when you played against continental opposition, it was easier because the centre forwards in the European Cup would drop off, and if you got the ball they wouldn't come and pester you. And that was great to play against. I mean, they were obviously more skillful, better technically than our players, but they wouldn't cause you problems physically. The best player I ever played against was Maradona. I played against him at Hampden when he was 18, and you could see then that he was sensational. I had a ploy that when somebody was coming towards me with the ball and they could pass it, I used to go one way to try and force them the other way and then come back quickly. I did that against Maradona. By the time I got back, he was 10 yards behind me. And I think it's a shame that people are going to remember him because of the drugs, because for me, he certainly is the second best player that's ever played, behind Pelé. I don't think anybody's ever won a World Cup single-handedly, but in '86 in Mexico, he came as near as anybody will ever come. Maradona. We had a sign at Liverpool, this is Anfield, and I used to touch this sign before I played in every game. And it must have been intimidating to the opposition to look at this sign, because it certainly gave us a big lift. Me as a player walking down, captain of Liverpool, going out to a 40,000 crowd and touching this sign, this is Anfield. I tell you what, it made you feel $1 million. And as soon as you touched that and got down the tunnel, then it was just like a release. You were totally in control of everything you were doing. No nerves at all. Couldn't hear the crowd. And you just got on with it. Whereas from 2:15 onwards, like a nervous wreck, you're back and forth to the toilet, the adrenaline's pumping, you're scared you're going to have a bad game, you're worried about the opposition. The first derby game against Everton, you just won't believe the noise in the ground. It's the only time I've played professional football at any time that you couldn't hear yourself think when you come on the pitch. It was incredible. And it was funny to see the Blues and the Reds together. It's unique in football. And never a hint of trouble. And I went out that night, and I was staying in digs in Liverpool, and I went into one of the pubs there with my mates, and it was 0-0. And of course, again in the pubs, the Blues and Reds sitting together. And I'm thinking, well, that's alright at the minute, but once they have a few drinks, they start arguing, there might be trouble. But again, come late at night, not a bit of trouble. And that was the great thing about playing in derby. The three cup finals, 84 Milk Cup final, 86 FA Cup final, and 89 FA Cup final. Wembley Way with the red and blue together. It was just sensational to play in because you knew there was never going to be any trouble. It was going to be a great occasion, and all the derby games were the same. The football on the pitch was sometimes mediocre. In the early days that I played in them, Everton didn't have a great team, and it would be fast and furious. And obviously, they were all tense, and it was never a spectacle as far as the football was concerned. It was always a great occasion. But then in the mid 80s, Everton got a very, very good side, and we had a good side, and the football became a bit better. And there were some great games, but they were always special to play in. I think I played them at 32 of them. I never really enjoyed any of them because of the tension, but great to see. Well, obviously Bob Paisley signed me, and I thought he was a great manager. He had great knowledge of the game of football. A lot of people said that, Shankly laid the foundations. I don't think you can argue that. Bill Shankly took Liverpool Football Club from obscurity and mediocrity into the upper echelons of English football. But Bob Paisley came along and he kept him up there for, I think, 7, 8, 9 years, winning everything in sight. Now, to do that, you've got to have a tremendous amount of talent, a tremendous amount of knowledge, and a lot of help. He signed players for Liverpool that have stood the test of time and have become legends at Liverpool. He signed Dalglish from Celtic. Nobody said you could replace Keegan. Bob Paisley signed Kenny Dalglish, who has turned out to be probably the best player that ever played for Liverpool. Bob Paisley signed him. He was very, very astute. When he went to sign players in the knowledge that every player has a weakness. He used to say that every 6 months. There has not been a player yet that hasn't had a weakness. So the lads used to say, what about Pelly? And he'd come up with some obscure reason for Pelly having a weakness. And he was great at not only finding the weaknesses of opposition, but the weaknesses of his players. And he could tell you what your weakness was, and he could tell your colleagues what your weakness was. And of course the principle is avoid your own weaknesses and exploit the weaknesses of opposition. And he was brilliant at that. He could look at the opposition and say, for example, about game 3 or 4 I played for Liverpool. I'm sitting next to Dalglish at Anfield. Obviously I wear 6, he wears 7. Bob Paisley comes up to him before the game against Chelsea and says the Chelsea goalkeeper drifts too far off his line. 6 minutes into the game, ball played in edge of the box into Dalglish's feet. He turns, he does not even look up, and he chips the keeper. Now that's what you call trust between player and manager. And I think that any time Bob Paisley said anything to me or any of the players, you knew what he was saying was spot on. He wasn't great with words, but when he said something to you, he always took note. And he was just very, very sensible. He was a very sensible man. Again, he was ruthless to the point that Liverpool Football Club was everything. And individuals didn't matter. The supporters came and watched a Liverpool team that must win championships, must win trophies, and we'll do it any way we can. When he was describing my weakness, it wasn't in the singular, it was... You need about 3 chapters to describe my weaknesses, but he was great with me. I had a bad 5 or 6 weeks at the end of 77, 78, and then I came back and played well and got the team to the European Cup final. But he just put his hand on my shoulder and said, it'll come back, everybody has a bad time, you're only young, you've just come here, it's a big thing to come into this team, don't worry about it, you're back in the reserves, you just play your way out of trouble. And again, that was the big thing about Liverpool in that era. A lot of people would say, well, you must have been coached. I never ever had any coaching at Liverpool. It was sink or swim. They put you in the reserves played the same system as the first team. You had to learn in the reserves, and when you went into the first team, if you didn't play well, you're back in the reserves to learn again. No coaching at all. Very, very simple. You were playing training, and the philosophy was pass it and move. Pass it, move, and the training was... I was worried about the training before I went to Liverpool because I was scared it'd be tough, but the training was very much laugh, have a joke, enjoy it. Do the hard work, but have this team spirit thing where you're laughing and joking and enjoying yourself. And training was never a bind. It was always great to go training and laugh and joke with the lads, and it was very much encouraged. Bob Paisley used to have meetings on a Friday morning, and of course old Bob, couldn't string two sentences together. And he used to come in on a Friday morning, and what made matters worse would be Terry Mack would come in just before him and impersonate exactly what he was going to do, and sure as anything, Bob would come in and do exactly just what Terry's done. The hands would be on the table, and he'd start the team meeting off, and of course, the great difficulty was not to laugh. And Bob used to come up with some classic lines, and he'd start off and used to read out what the opposition team would be. And Southampton had a Polish player called Andruszewski. Difficult to say. Of course, Bob had no chance, and he'd start off this particular day, he'd come in, hands on the table, and you're trying not to laugh, and he'd say, right, the Southampton team tomorrow will be Wells, Andrusz, yeah, the Polish player, and of course, well, how can you not laugh at that? Everybody's in hysterics, and he doesn't know why they're in hysterics, and every Friday morning would be the same, and we'd played Aston Villa one week, and we beat them 3-1, it was what he would describe as a tousy game, but Aston Villa were going quite well, it was a battle, and we did well, and everybody was happy because we were going to Villa Park 3-1. And he starts the team meeting the next week, and he says, against Aston Villa last Saturday, if we'd have started the game airy-fairy, we'd been right up the Swanee. Now, what is that supposed to mean? What? You're sitting there, what does that mean? If you start the game off airy-fairy, you'd be right up the Swanee. Well, the continuity things with the managers was very, very shrewd. Obviously, Paisley following Shankly, and then Joe Fagan following Bob Paisley. Now, Joe Fagan was a fantastic man, and probably he's never had the credit he's deserved for his part in the sort of 25 years of Liverpool success. First with Shankly, and then right-hand man to Bob Paisley, and then a manager in his own right, because I think he's the only one to win a treble. In 1984, he won the Championship, European Cup and the League Cup. And he always had the players on his side. Every manager when I was there at Liverpool always had the players on their side. When Paisley took over, obviously I wasn't there, but when Joe took over, all the lads in the dressing room wanted Joe to take over. When Kenny took over, all the lads in the dressing room, they wanted Kenny to take over. And obviously, the policy of continuity worked wonders. And John Smith and Peter Robertson take all the accolades, because it was them that instigated that policy. And I honestly don't think that Liverpool would have had the success that they had without promoting from within. And they've gone back to that policy now, and proof of the pudding is the Coca-Cola Cup win at Wembley, and I think certainly that Liverpool can get back to the winning ways. I've known Roy since day one at Liverpool, and actually I went into the reserve team when he was coach there, and immediately struck me as a man that players would play for. He had this great ability, very similar to Joe Fagan, that you look to the guy, you work with him on the training pitch, and you think players will respond to you. And certainly a lot of people, when he became Liverpool manager, it was Roy who, but anybody that knew him and anybody that worked alongside him at Liverpool automatically knew they'd made the right choice. Respect of all the players in the dressing room, very much the common sense approach, great wealth and knowledge about football, and obviously working under the managers that we've just mentioned, Shankly, Paisley, Fagan, Dalglish. No qualms about Roy Evans becoming Liverpool manager. I think again that they've come back from the road to nowhere to being successful again. In hindsight, people have said that Graham Souness was the wrong choice for Liverpool. But personally, when Souness came back to Liverpool, I, like many other people, were doing cartwheels, because there's no doubt in my mind that at that time he was the right choice. And it was going away from promoting from within, but really Souness had been there 7 years as a player. It was Liverpool through and through, and it was just like promoting from within. Things didn't work out for him at Liverpool, and I think the biggest reason was that he judged everybody by his own standards. Souness was the most incredible competitor I ever met. He was fantastic to play behind the team, because the never say die attitude and will to win for 90 minutes in every game he ever played in was just phenomenal. But I think his big failing, and he would admit this, that as a manager, some players need kick up the backside, but other players need, the friendly arm around the shoulder. And if things are going badly, and Graham, he just couldn't get to grips with the fact that people didn't want to win as much as he wanted to win. And I think that was a failing, and I think that, again, he would admit to that. But it was terribly sad for me for the way it worked out for Souness at Liverpool. Simply because he was one of the greatest players that ever played for Liverpool. He was a friend of mine, he still is a friend of mine, and I was willing him to be successful more than anybody else. And I'm sure the Liverpool crowd were, and even when they hit the bad times, I'm sure that 99% of Liverpool supporters were willing to pull through, but it just didn't happen for him. Well, the reason I never became a manager was that watching the Liverpool managers and watching managers in the Premiership and the Football League when it was, I felt under lots of pressure as a player. To become a manager, you can multiply that by 10. The last year I was at Liverpool, when we won the Championship, when Villa were coming close, the pressure was unbearable as a player. I wasn't getting to sleep at night because I'm thinking, well, if Villa get 3 points there and we only get one there, we're not going to win this Championship. And when it gets to that stage, you can forget it. And I was realistic enough to know that if I'm finding that sort of pressure as a player, then I'm just going to be a nervous wreck as a manager, and it's one step towards asylum, basically, and that was the reason I never went into it. But I never really had any aspirations to go on the coaching side. I enjoyed my time as a player. Obviously, with the winning things with Liverpool, I look back and I think, well, did it really happen? But that's gone now. It's great to look back and think I've won the 17 major trophies and the 8 championships, and it's phenomenal success, and nothing can ever replace these times. No amount of money in the world. People say, why didn't you go to Italy? I never went to Italy because I was having a great time at Liverpool. I was part of something that was special. I was enjoying myself. The winning of trophies, the great times after the winning of trophies, you wake up the next morning and obviously you've got a sore head, but the feeling of exhilaration, knowing that you've won something, just cannot be beaten. I knew I was never going to become a manager. I never ever wanted to become a manager. And I don't really regret it. The one thing I regret, and the one thing I miss about professional football, is the dressing room. I miss going into the dressing room in the morning and the wind-ups and the laughs and the jokes and the great team spirit we had at Liverpool, and going to the training ground and enjoying ourselves, and Grobbler coming in and messing about, and Stevie Nicol, who was a legend in the Liverpool dressing room, me winding him up, and the ups and downs of professional football, especially at Liverpool, with the expectations of the supporters, and going home on a Saturday night after being beaten and thinking, I played badly and this could be the end of my career, and then coming out the next week and playing great, and think, well, I can go on forever. But it's all gone for me now, and I look back and I've had my time, and I've never regretted anything about it. Just wonderful, wonderful years. Well, I roomed initially with Alan Kennedy for 7 years at Liverpool, and he'll still tell everybody that I was a ladies so-and-so. He used to bring me breakfast in bed every morning, and he'd always answer the door if anybody came to the door. But we were a pretty sedate couple, we were sort of watch the television and have a laugh. But I mean, the likes of Grobbler and Stevie Nick, and Grobbler was great in the dressing room. Grobbler was fantastic value. But team spirit, right the way through the time at Liverpool, we had great characters. But Grobbler was great off the pitch, and he was different on the pitch. I think you'd have to say, if you looked at his career, and right away you look at the stats and say you cannot win as many medals as he has done without being an exceptional goalkeeper. You cannot play for Liverpool as many times as he's done without being an exceptional goalkeeper. Now, a lot of people would look at Grobbler's career and say he was erratic, eccentric, and I played in front of him for a long, long time, and he'd definitely been up there in definitely the top 5 goalkeepers in this country in the last 20 years, without a shadow of a doubt, maybe even better than that. I think the biggest thing is that when he was making the mistakes, that because of television and the way he came out and sometimes missed, people would look at him and say, well, he is erratic and he's not reliable. But the great thing about Grobbler was that you knew he was coming every time. When I played alongside Clements, you knew he was staying every time. Grobbler, you knew he was coming every time. The biggest difficulty with goalkeepers is the ones that occasionally stay, or even worse, will come halfway and then go back. At least with Grobler, you knew he was coming every time. Alright, he's hit me in the head about 220 times, but that isn't a problem, because I knew he was coming every time. Alright, occasionally he'd miss them. But if you know he's coming every time, then there isn't a problem with that. On his line, his reflexes were sensational. The difference between him and Clemens was that if Clemens didn't touch the ball in 90 minutes, Clem would be really happy. If Bruce didn't touch the ball in 10 minutes, he'd come looking for it. And he used to come off his line, and the team meetings before the game, as far as Bruce Grobler was concerned, were the same week in, week out. Bruce, if you come out your box, kick it into the 8th row in the stand. Don't dribble. And for 20 games in the trot, he would do that. And then the ball would get played through, and I could tell every time he was going to dribble, the eyes, I could tell by his eyes. Grobler's eyes, he'd come off his line, and I'd go, oh, here we go. And he'd dribble. And the great thing, and the unanswered thing as far as I'm concerned, even watching him play with Southampton, and I'll have to ask him about it one day, is why, when he does dribble, he takes it in his left foot. He always comes back, he hasn't got a left foot, he's right-footed. And if you watch him, he always dribbles it on his left side. And then makes a mess of it. Instead of just kicking it with his right. But of course, it's a great thing about goalkeepers who think they're good outfield players. Clem was the same at Anfield, in training. He'd play in the left wing and think he was a good player, and he was hopeless. You never wanted Clem your side. Bruce was the same. Bruce would play outfield. He was diabolical. He couldn't play, but he'd always say he could play centre back for any team in the first division at the time. And Stevie Nicol told me this. He said Bruce reckons he could play, and I said yeah, and he'd wake up in a minute, because obviously he could never play an outfield position, but he thought he could. Great confidence. I think that he was handled very well at Liverpool, because they knew exactly when to give him a kick up the backside, and they knew exactly when to put the arm around the shoulder and tell him he's doing alright. And when he was doing the dribbling, it wouldn't be a set formula what they would say to him. They would take in account into how they thought he was doing, or how he was feeling, or if he needed a lift, or if he needed brought down. I mean, basically it was the players. I used to say to him, Bruce, for goodness sake, just kick it. Don't just play percentages and kick it. And he'd say, yeah. The hand would come up to me and say, yeah. The one flaw with Grobler, I would say, would be the communication between goalkeeper and defence. He wasn't in the same league as Clemens. Clemens was brilliant at organising the defence, whereas Bruce was very much a showman. He wasn't for communicating with the defence. Clemens would say out to the defence so you knew when to get out. I think Bruce was intent on just getting the ball. He wanted to be so involved all the time that he was only focused on what he was doing. But still a fabulous keeper. If you're ever going out as a group, you'd want him there. If you were playing golf or snooker or anything, brilliant, because he played any sport the way he played in goals. Everything was Hollywood. You never knew anything about percentage. You never knew anything about percentages in life. He was larger than life. He'd come into the dressing room, and if you said, I can lift this table up, he'd have to lift the table up with somebody on top of it. He was always that sort of thing, and he had great lines, and his patter was great, and he was just a character. And Nicol was the same. You got the two of them together, and they were just fun to be with. And I remember one time when we were playing the British Club Championship against Celtic in Dubai. There was problems with the flight, stopped off in Bahrain, and we were having a drink, and Bruce went to the toilet, and there was a banister there. And of course Bruce can't walk down the stairs, it's too easy, too simple to walk down the stairs. So he tries and slides down a banister. So it was one of these that had the nuts in the middle. And he came back up, and his tracksuit was torn to shreds, and his calf was torn to shreds, and he walked in the room, and Roy said, "What have you done?" He said, I tried to slide down a banister. His leg was cut to ribbons. But that was Bruce, far too easy to walk down the stairs. I've got to go down the banister. And he was just like that with everything. He was sensational company. And Stevie Nick was the same. And we tried to portray the Scots as a master race, Soonest Dalglish and myself, and it was going great until they signed Stevie Nicol from Ayr United, and he quickly became a legend in the Liverpool dressing room for all the wrong reasons. And people used to wind him up, and in the end the Scots would wind him up. And we're preparing for the European Cup final in Israel in 1984, and I have played 65 games in the trot for Liverpool, and I've done my hamstring the last game of the season, and I think I'm going to miss the European Cup final, which is the biggest game anybody's ever going to play in. And Nico comes across to me and he says, I think Kenny's a bit down on this trip, Kenny Dalglish. What's wrong with him? And I'm thinking to myself, it's not Kenny it's down, it's me it's down. I'm going to miss the European Cup final. What are you talking about? So he kept on, he was relentless with this argument that Kenny was down. I said, well, I shouldn't really tell you this, but he's only got 6 months to live. So the arms have gone up over his face, he's aghast, he can't believe it. So 5 minutes later he goes to the toilet, and Graham, as soon as the captain, he comes across to me and he says, what did you tell Steve Nick? I said, well, unbelievable. I said that Kenny's got 6 months to live, incurable disease, and he's fallen for it. He said, well, take him back to the hotel, I'll phone Kenny up, and Kenny will act a part of it. So we get in the taxi, Nico and I, and we go back to the hotel, and I'm looking at one window, and he's looking at the other window, and I cannot believe that he's fallen for this. And he, a little tap on the shoulder, and he said to me, when you get into that room at the hotel, don't show him any pity. It's the worst thing you can do is show him pity. And I'm thinking, oh no. So we get back to the hotel, I phone Kenny up, and he says, bring him up. 2 pints of lager, dry martini, lemonade. Get into the bedroom, Kenny's lying in the bed, he's lying in the bed. So Nico said, look, Big Al's a bit upset, he's told me that you've only got 6 months to live. So the Dalglish actor turned to me and he said, I told you not to tell anybody. I said, well, I had to tell him, he was relentless. So the conversation went on, and Nico said to Kenny, when did this happen? So Kenny said, well, remember that throwing you took in the League Cup final at Wembley? And Nico said, yeah, I put it around about your shoulder. He said, what was it, the throwing? He said, just hit me in the shoulder. I had a bad shoulder, went for tests, and I'm on my way out. So again the conversation went on, and there was a lull. And I knew Nico better than anybody, and when there's a lull in the conversation, just leave him, because pearls of wisdom will soon fall. And he didn't disappoint me, because he turned to Dalglish, looked him straight in the face, and said to him, I was just saying to my wife earlier last week, I was wondering why you were playing so badly. We went out of the room, and Kenny and I were on the floor laughing, and he heard that, but he thought we were just saying goodbye. And we went up to the square in Tel Aviv, and all the lads knew that we were taking him into the room, and they were all waiting for him. And he wouldn't have a drink. He sat down and he's like that, and Kenny said, don't tell anybody. He sat down and Phil Thompson said, we're here preparing for the European Cup final, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? But I'll tell you what's wrong with you. I've just been seeing Kenny in that room, and he's dying. And, he was great at impersonations, and he could do an American preacher. And again, one time, and I think it was Dubai we were in, and it was a packed luncheon place. I can't remember what bit of the airport it was, but it was packed, and he got up in front of everybody, and nobody knew. He was just out of the blue. He did the American preacher, and they gave him a standing ovation. And then he was just like that. It was, you never knew what was going to happen next with the two of them, and it made for great fun. And whenever you're away, you know, in the card school at Legendary, you used to play a game called Hearts. It was a game where you had to have a decent memory, and it's similar to trumps. And the object was you didn't want to be left with any hearts or the Queen of Spades. And Nico and Bruce were the worst you've ever seen at this game. And of course, if you were playing pairs and you got left with either or, I mean, it was just a nightmare. And they used to get absolutely slaughtered. Rush, McMahon, Ray Houghton, Kevin McDonald. But they always wanted to play the game. And then the quizzes, they were hopeless at quizzes. They used to have the quizzes in the bus as well. And nobody would ever want to be the quiz master, because they'd wait for the slur of the words or saying the wrong words, and then they'd be on to you like a shot. You used to call them ricks. You know, if you said the wrong thing at any time, the lads in the dressing room or in the bus. When Kenny became manager, he was aware. I think for the first 6 months of the year, it was fear and trepidation for him every time he had to make a speech at a team meeting, because the lads would be sitting there waiting for the Rick, you know, and then they'd start laughing, and Kenny would say, did I say that? What did I say? Alright, what did I say wrong? What have I done wrong? And then they'd tell him. They'd say,
That's it. Please change tapes for more from Alan Hansen.